Welcome to your algebra recording for the week. This recording is going to give you an overview of what you're going to be learning this week, as well as a little bit of review from last week that will help you with this week as well. So at this time, I would like you to make sure you've got your math notebook out and you're ready to take good notes, because I promise you taking notes is going to help you as you go through Edgenuity this week and as you do your assignments in Edgenuity this week. We are in week 14, so just a heads up when you log in that you will be headed to week 14, and you've probably already headed there because you're at this recording now. I do want you to try in your math notebook these two warm-up problems where we've got some polynomials. We've got more than one term, making it a polynomial, and what I want you guys to do, the directions are missing, but I want you to factor out the greatest common factor. So we're going to factor these polynomials, and we're going to factor them by factoring out the greatest common factor, just like you guys did last week. So when you look at each of the polynomials, you're going to look to see the factors of the constant terms, those whole numbers, and then what you can factor out of those looking at the variables as well. So go ahead and try that in your math notebook, and when you're ready to check your work with mine, go ahead and click play. So first, let's focus on factoring out a whole number. So we've got 6 and 12. What is the greatest common factor between 6 and 12? And that would have to be 6. So the greatest common factor is going to be 6. And then what about the greatest common factor when we're looking at our variables? It's going to be x, and then it's going to be x squared, because the greatest exponent's 2. So we can use x squared as our greatest common factor there. So now we need to figure out when we multiply 6x squared times what will give us 12x cubed. So what times 6x squared will give us 12x cubed? So we can do this piece by piece. So what times 6 will give us 12? 2. 2 times 6 gives us 12. Now we need to figure out what times x squared will give us x cubed. And that's just going to be x, because remember, x is like saying x to the first power. We just don't have to put that x in there, or that 1 in there. We know that it's to the first power. And then remember, when you multiply variables, you add the exponents. So it would be 2 plus 1, which is 3. And I'm going to take that 1 out there because we don't really need that. And then what about 6x squared? How do we get that? Well, we're already there, aren't we? If we want to get 6x squared, we've got 6x squared. So we just need to put a placeholder of 1. 1 times 6x squared gives us 6x squared. So that is fully factored out. Let's look at the next question now. We've got 3 terms. So let's just look at our whole numbers. We've got 10, 20, and negative 5. So what do all those numbers have in common in terms of a factor? So I know 10 is divisible by 2 and 5. 20 is divisible by 2 and 5 as well. Negative 5 is not divisible by 2. It's only divisible by 5. So all 3 of these are divisible by 5. So that's going to be my first common factor that I'm going to go ahead and pull out of my parentheses. And then what about the y's? What is the lowest degree of our y's? That would have to be y to the first degree. So you always want to pull out the lowest degree, the lowest exponent that your variables are all raised to. All right, so now we need to have our 3 different numbers in our set of parentheses. So 5 times what? We need to get to 10. We need to look at our first term here and say, what times 5 would give us 10? And that has to be 2. And then we got to get our y cubed, or y to the third power. So y times what would give us y cubed? And that would have to be y squared. And then our next term is positive, so I'm going to go ahead and put a plus in there. And 5 times what gives us 20? 5 times 4 would give us 20. And 5 times, to get that y squared, we would just do y times y. And then last but not least, that last term is negative, so I'm going to put a negative sign in there. And we need 5y. We've got 5y, so if we just take 5y and multiply it by a negative 1, that's going to give us negative 5y. So that's our final answer. We don't need those underlines. I just put those in there to kind of as a placeholder for us to know that we've got 3 different terms we've got to put in there. So we can take those all out. Those aren't part of the answer. They are just a placeholder. All right, so I'm going to go on to the next slide. So if you need more time with this, go ahead and click pause so that you can finish taking your notes. All right, so this week we're going to learn all about factoring polynomials. So we're going to kind of continue with that theme of factoring, and we're going to look at how to factor polynomials. This is important, guys. There's no school next week because of Thanksgiving, but what is really important is Schoology is available over break. So you've got a full week off next week. If you are behind, I highly recommend that you work over break to get caught up. When we get back from break, there's only, or not even when we get back, right now there's 5 weeks. When we get back, there's only about 4 weeks when we get back. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, like 3.5 weeks when we get back. So I highly recommend if you're behind to work over break. Schoology is available 24/7. It's available over break. Do note that teachers are not available over break, so if you send emails to your teachers, you're not going to get a response until after break. So that's next week. All right, so factoring. So the first type of factoring we're going to look at is when we've got a polynomial that looks like this. We've got x squared, an x squared term, and then we've got an x term, and then a constant term. And when that a term, so this coefficient in front of our x, when that's a 1, we can follow these rules to help us factor. So here's some examples of what that looks like. So see how it just says x squared in both these problems, these examples? It's just x squared. There's no coefficient. It's not like 3x squared or 10x squared. It's just plain old x squared. And then we've got a number times an x, and then we've got a whole number. So it follows this same pattern, x squared, an x term, and then a constant number. So when we have polynomials that are set up like this, we can factor them following a pretty straightforward pattern. So what we're going to do here is we're always going to look, we're going to start with focusing on our c term or our whole number. So what we do is we say, okay, I'm going to focus on this number, and I want to find factors of the c term that add up to the b term. So we're going to focus a lot on the a term and the b term, because those two numbers are going to be very helpful for us when we are factoring. So we want to find factors of the c term that add up to the b term. So we're going to look for factors of the c term that add up to the b term. And the way I like to do it is, okay, here's my looking at this first problem, x squared plus 9x plus 14x. So we're trying to factor it, right? We're trying to get 2 sets of parentheses and the numbers that go in those parentheses and the variables. So we're going to have x and x, and then we're going to have like x plus something or x minus a number over here and x plus or minus a number over here. So to figure out what numbers go here and here, we're going to use this pattern. We're going to find factors of the c term that when we add them up, they equal the b term. Add up to, that should say equal. All right, so let's do it. So our c term in our first example is 14. So I like to do it like this. And then what I'll do is I put 2 little arrows, if you will, down. And I think, okay, I need 2 factors of 14. that when I add those two factors up, it's going to be equal to the b term, and in this case, the b term is 9. So what are two factors of 14? You might think, well, 1 times 14 gives us 14. But then when we add 1 plus 14, does it equal 9? No. So those two factors wouldn't work. So let's try some other factors. What are some other factors of 14? What times what would give us 14? That's what I mean when I say factors. So 2 and 7. 2 times 7 is 14. 2 times 7 is 14. Now, according to our pattern, our rules, now we need to add those two numbers, and they should equal the middle term, which was 9. Our middle term was 9. And does it? It sure does. 2 plus 7 equals 9. So that means that these two numbers are the numbers that are going to go here and here. So I'm going to have plus 2 and plus 7. And those are factored now. So we can check our work. We can always go back and check our work. So I'm going to kind of move this over a little bit. So, whoops. I want our work to stay here, but then let's do this. Which side do I want it on? Let's go over here. That's our work. So remember now to go back to our polynomial form. We just need to distribute. So we can take our outer term times our inner term. So it would be x squared. Then we take this term times our outer term. We would get that 7x. Then our inner term, that 2, we multiply it by x to get 2x. And 2 times 7 would give us that 14. Add our like terms together, and we would have 9x in the middle there, and that was our original problem. So we know we factored correctly. We know we factored correctly. We're going to try this again. We're going to try this one more. We're going to try this one more time. I'm going to kind of go up here and square our directions to follow. All right. So looking at the second problem, it says find the factors of the c term. So our c term, remember, is always that constant number. So our c term is going to be negative 10. So we're trying to find factors of negative 10. Let's change colors here. So factors of negative 10 that add up to the b term. The b term is that the number being multiplied by x. That's our b term. So we want to find factors of negative 10. So two numbers, when we multiply times each other, would give us negative 10. And when we add those two factors up together, they should equal 3. So what are some factors of 10? You might be thinking 5 and 2. So remember, though, because it has to be factors of a negative number, one of them's got to be negative. So I'm going to put a negative in for 5. Does negative 5 plus 2 equal positive 3? It does not. So maybe I need to switch my negative sign over to here and make my 2 negative. So now, when I add 5 plus negative 2, that's the same thing as saying 5 minus 2, that equals 3. So that works. So our factors, now remember when we start factoring, all we do is we put an x in the front of our parentheses, and then now these two numbers are going to go by the x's. We just figured those out. So plus 5 because it was a positive 5 and minus 2. That is our factored form right here. It's factored. That's our answer. We factored. And this was our factored up here. So factored form and polynomial form is the same. It represents the same numbers. It's just a different form. It's just a different form. So keep that in mind that here, x squared plus 3x minus 10, it's represented down here just in a different format. If we were to distribute, we could go and get it back to that form. So these are just two different forms representing the same amount. Factored form, polynomial form. Factored form, polynomial. Factored, polynomial. I'm going to go on to the next slide, so if you need more time, go ahead and click pause so that you can take down notes. Our last type of way to factor is when we've got our a term, which is that term, the number being multiplied by the x squared, when that's greater than 1. So now look, I've got before we just had plain x squared, now I've got 2x squared. So when we factor now, it's going to be a little bit different. Unfortunately, that pattern where you find factors of the C term that add up to that B term isn't going to work here. So what I like to do is trial and error. I really like trial and error in this situation, where we know we're going to have our x terms here, but we know that we have to have a 2x squared. So I know one of my x's will have to have a 2 in front of them so that when I go back and multiply 2x times x, it would give me that x squared. Now I have to figure out what goes here and here that gives me those terms at negative 72 and that 18. So let's go ahead and try that. So what are some factors? So I think to myself, what are some factors of negative 72 that I'm just going to start trial and error here. So factors of negative 72, and I'm really just going to try trial and error and plugging different numbers in and then distributing to see if it works. So some factors of negative 72, I can think we've got negative 8 and positive 9. So I'm going to go ahead and try those, negative 8 and positive 9. And then I'm just going to distribute and see if that works. So 2x times x, remember we have to distribute, would give us 2x squared. 2x times positive 9 would be 18x. And then negative 8 times x would be negative 8x. And then negative 8 times positive 9 would give us that, negative 72. So then I have to add my like terms in the middle here, and when I do that, it would be 18 minus 8 would be 10x, so plus 10x minus 72. So that did not work. That did not work. So what if I flip-flopped and I did 2x minus 8, and then, whoops, I wanted to flip-flop those. So, sorry, I'm going to say this would be plus 8. I'm going to flip-flop those and see if that changes, and maybe that will work. So quickly, I'm just going to distribute. So 2x squared, 2x times negative 8 is negative 18x. 9 times x gives me 9x. And then we know that's negative 72. That 8 times that 9 is negative 72. Add our like terms together. In the middle there, we've got 2x terms. So negative 18 plus 9 is negative 9. So that doesn't work either. We need to get that middle term has to be a negative 18. Has to be a negative 18. So neither one of these has worked. So it looks like we need to go back to the drawing board and try some other factors, because there are other factors of negative 72. So I know 72 is also divisible by 3. 3 times 24, but one of them has to be negative. So let's try if a negative 3. So again, we've got a 2x and an x. We've got to try a negative 3 and a positive 24. So trial and error, 2 times x is 2x squared. 2x times 24 is plus 48x minus 3x. Right away, I'm looking there and I know 48x minus 3x is not going to give us that negative 18. So I'm going to stop there. Now I'm going to flip it around and give that negative sign to the 24 and keep that 3 positive. So I'm just going to flip the sign. So now it's going to be positive 3 and negative 24. And let's see if that works. So 2x squared. 2x times negative 24 is negative 48x. And then we've got where was I? 2x squared negative 48 plus 33x. So right away I'm looking at my 3x's, and when I combine those, negative 48 plus 3 is negative 45. It doesn't give us that negative 18, so we need to try again. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch the order. Whoops, that got a little. I'm going to switch the order so that it's 2x minus 24 on this side and an x plus 3 on this side. And let's see what happens now. So 2x squared when I distribute, then 2x times 3 gives me 6x. Negative 24 times x gives me negative 24x, and then negative 24 times positive 3 gives me that negative 72. When I combine my like terms here, it looks like I've got 2x squared, negative 24 plus 6 gives me negative 18. There we go. That's what we were looking for. And minus 72. So this right here brings us back to our original problem, which means this is our, whoops, not that one. That is not the one. Our factored form is actually down here. All right. This is our factored form that's going to work. So you can see trial and error is a little bit clunky. It can take a little bit longer. And you're going to learn another way besides trial and error this week when you do your lessons. So it's a little bit more involved when you've got a number being multiplied by that x squared. So one method is just doing trial and error, and you can see that it's quite clunky. We had to try a lot of different options here. We had to try different positives and negatives. We had to switch the order of the numbers, change the positives to negatives. There's a lot of different things that we had to try before we finally got to that final answer here. So it can be quite clunky, but this week in Edgenuity, you are going to learn a method that you can use besides trial and error. So I'm going to go to the next slide, so if you need more time, go ahead and click pause. So what I want you to do for your key phrase assignment this week is you're going to factor x squared plus 5x plus 6. So remember this one, because there is no number in the it's a 1 here, so it's just x squared. So remember, we learned a pattern that will work every time when you've got just plain old x squared. So you need to factor this, and then you are done. So if you need a reminder of how to complete the key phrase assignment for the week of November 15th, the directions are below. Otherwise, remember, you can always contact me if you need some help on this or the rest of this week's assignments. So have a great rest of your week and a wonderful Thanksgiving break.